Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So on today's episode, I'm going to be taking you through an absolutely savage deck that I have added to my personal collection with Hofri Ghostforge, and yeah, this might not be your typical Hofri deck, and yeah, it can do some really brutal things. So yeah, even though this deck is very budget, it can definitely pack a punch and do some incredibly, like I've said before, savage and brutal things. So with all that said, let's jump into it. Actually, I keep forgetting to do this, but I should have mentioned before, this is a very budget-friendly deck. Every single card, including the commander, is less than $1. So now with all that said, let's jump into it. So Hofri Ghostforge is definitely not your typical Boros commander, and yeah, I really like the design of this one. It's a 4/5 dwarf cleric that costs 3 red-white. He has spirits you control get ++1 and have trample and haste. And he also has, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a spirit and issues other types, and it has, when this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to your graveyard. Now, I actually do want to point out before we get any further into this episode that, and these mistakes do happen, I'm not trying to bash Wizards by saying, these mistakes shouldn't happen, but this mistake is really relevant because the Oracle text now reads, when this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to its owner's graveyard. And yeah, that's important because I'm not sure if they anticipated that players would actually be using this commander to take other people's creatures and then, maybe sacrificing them, making a, token copy of them that's a spirit, and then once that token died, if this, card was red and it did exactly as it read, you would get their actual card into your graveyard, which Magic doesn't really like you being able to do. In fact, I don't think there's any actual real ways to actually get, an opponent's card into your library or graveyard or hand. And the reason that it is very important that they did change that Oracle text is because that's exactly what this deck wants to do. Not get our opponent's cards into our, into our library, graveyard, or hand, but we want to take our opponent's creatures and sacrifice them to get copies of their creatures to beat them with, token copies of their creatures. And those token copies, again, are going to be even more powerful because Hofri gives our spirits +1/+1, trample, and haste. So now they're going to be hasty, trampley, and more threateningly. There we go. And yeah, in these colors, we've got a lot of fantastic cards that can help us get our opponent's creatures, and then, also get rid of our opponent's creatures so that we can get those token copies of them. Keep in mind as well that this can really work well if our opponents have creatures that have ETBs or LTBs or death triggers or whatnot. And yeah, we very well might have some creatures of our own that have ETBs and LTBs and death triggers or whatnot. So with all that said, let's talk about the cards that this deck is built around. And of course, with this deck, we have to have the original Threaten effect in it. Okay, well, we really don't have to, but I wanted to, so we are going to be running Threaten. Threaten is a sorcery for 2 and a red, and it says, untap target creature and gain control of it until end of turn, and that creature gains haste until end of turn. So, typically this card, at least in Magic's history, was used to, temporarily gain control of an opponent's creature so that you could, attack that opponent with their own creature. Back in the day, your opponent might have a, green deck and have a monstrously large creature on the board, and they might think that they have you in a bad position, but then, you just threaten their creature, and then you take their biggest creature, and then you take your creatures, and you swing at that opponent, and then you win. Yay, everyone has fun. Oh, okay, well, you have the most fun. Anyways. With this deck, though, yes, we can take an opponent's creature and, still attack with it, but we can also just sacrifice that creature, make a token copy of it, again with Hofri, which is going to be even bigger and more threatening, And yeah, our opponent doesn't get their creature back now. Now they'll get that creature back into their graveyard, eventually if our token copy of that creature dies, but they're not getting it back into play. So threaten effects like this one, when paired with sacrifice outlets, which we'll talk about here in a bit, are essentially targeted removal that gives us a token copy of our opponent's creatures thanks to Hofri. So yeah, there's a reason why I call this deck absolutely savage. And of course, Threaten is not the only Threaten effect that we're going to be running. We're going to be running a ton of Threaten effects in this deck, like Price of Loyalty, Active Aggression, Active Treason, Goat Nap, Pax Betrayal, Traitorous Greed, Wrangle, and Carry Zeb's Expertise, and actually some more coming up here in a bit. Now, most of these essentially do the exact same thing, just getting us a creature, and they might have some other kind of weird synergies with certain creatures, like Goat Nap will pump a creature if it's a goat or whatnot, which never really comes up, but yeah, I'll quickly highlight a couple differences. Like Traitorous Greed says, it's 4 mana, you get that creature, and then you also get 2 mana of any one color, so there's a small difference there where it costs more, and then you get some mana. Again, we just want a ton of threaten effects in this deck, and they all can be very effective in their own ways. Wrangle's another one where we just get a discount on the card where it costs just 1 in a red, so 2 mana in total. We gain control of target creature with power 4 or less until end of turn. So yeah, this one is limited to smaller creatures, but still it can be very impactful. And speaking of very impactful, Carry Zeb's Expertise might have, a more restrictive casting cost of 1 red, but essentially we can get either a vehicle or a creature, and also, more importantly, we can cast a card with converted mana cost 2 less from our hand without paying its mana cost, so we can cast something for free. But yeah, essentially, all of these are threaten effects, and that's what this deck is looking for. We're also looking for threaten effects that can get us multiple creatures like Harness by Force, Mass Mutiny, and Mob Rule. Harness by Force has a strive cost of 2 in red, so essentially if we keep paying that cost, we can target more and more creatures to threaten more creatures. And then Mass Mutiny says for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures to gain haste until end of turn. Or again, in this deck, this is basically, hey, for each opponent, you get rid of one of their creatures and you get a token copy of it for just 5 mana. And Mob Rule can be even bigger. It's a sorcery for 4 red that says choose 1, gain control of all creatures with power 4 or greater until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn, or basically the exact same thing but for creatures with power 3 or less until end of turn. So take all the big creatures in play or all the small creatures in play, and again, that depends on the situation and what the board state is. But yeah, with this deck, you can essentially gain control of the vast majority of the board, taking out all of your opponent's creatures, or most of them, and getting token copies of them. But of course, we also have some repeatable threaten effects, which we can find on Captivating Crew and Might Makes Right. Captivating Crew is a 4/3 human pirate that costs 3 in a red that has pay 3 in a red, gain control of target creature and opponent controls until end of turn, untap that creature, gains haste until end of turn, activates ability only anytime you cast a sorcery. Having a repeatable effect like this can be absolutely huge. Again, it's a fantastic way to keep controlling the board, taking our opponent's best creatures and making them our own. And then Might Makes Right is kind of like a free threaten effect every turn for us. It's an enchantment for 5 in a red, and it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control each creature on the battlefield with the greatest power, gain control of target creature and opponent controls until end of turn, untap that creature, gains haste until end of turn. With this deck, we can pretty much guarantee that we're going to have the biggest creature on the board. Again, even if we just have 1 threaten effect in our hand, we just go grab the biggest creature on the board, we sacrifice it to make a token copy of it, it gets even bigger thanks to our commander, and then, yeah, Might Makes Right is going to trigger so we can steal another creature. So yeah, this little uncommon enchantment can do a lot of work for us. And speaking of doing a lot of work for us, we've got some more creatures that can really help this deck out with Coercive Recruiter, Conquering Manticore, and Molten Primordial. Coercive Recruiter says whenever it or another pirate enters the battlefield under your control, gain control of target creature until end of turn, untap that creature, until end of turn it gains haste, becomes a pirate initiative to other types. And then Conquering Manticore is basically the exact same thing, but, without that pirate clause. So whenever it enters the battlefield, you gain control of target creature and opponent controls until end of turn, untap that creature, gains haste until end of turn. So essentially with either of these, we are getting a threaten effect on an ETB, which again is incredible in this deck because when they come into play, we can, take an opponent's creature, gain control of it, sacrifice that creature, make a token copy of it. And we can also, also just sacrifice either of these to make a token copy of them to get that ETB again to threaten another opponent's creature. But an even bigger effect, and one that is absolutely incredible in this deck, is Molten Primordial. It has, when it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn. So this is basically a mass mutiny on a creature. And yeah, this can get out of control if we've got a sacrifice outlet. So we gain control of 3 creatures. We sacrifice those creatures to make token copies of them. Cool. We sacrifice Molten Primordial. We gain control of 3 more creatures because we get a token copy of Molten Primordial coming into play for its ETB again. Then we sacrifice those creatures to, get 3 more copies of them. We just removed 6 of our opponent's creatures and got copies of all of them. But how are we actually going to go about sacrificing these creatures to make this all work? Well, we can see one of these fantastic effects that can make this whole thing work with the Golden Pig of this deck, which of course is the #1 card out of 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Goblin Bombardment, which yes, is finally budget thanks to its most recent reprint. It's an enchantment for 1 in a red that says sacrifice a creature. Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to any target. So this is a free sacrifice outlet that lets us ping things too, which is just fantastic. And yeah, the fact that this is free is huge for a deck like this, where we can, again, threaten opponent's creature, sacrifice it, get a token copy of that creature, and yeah, that is a ton of value on top of being able to ping something for 1, even if it's just to an opponent's face. That can really add up throughout the game. These kinds of sacrifice outlets just really make this deck churn, and yeah, this one is especially effective, again, being a free sacrifice outlet that can give us some additional damage, so that's what makes it the Golden Pig. That being said, of course, we've got other outlets in this deck like Barrage of Expendables and Makeshift Munitions. Barrage of Expendables has pay a red, sacrifice a creature. Barrage of Expendables deals 1 damage to any target, and Makeshift Munitions has pay 1, sacrifice an artifact or creature, deals 1 damage to any target. So obviously these are inferior to Goblin Bombardment, but they can still be very effective. Speaking of which, we also have outlets that can give us card advantage as well, like Dark Dweller Oracle, Culling Dais, and Phyrexian Vault. Dark Dweller Oracle has pay 1, sacrifice a creature, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, so again, kind of like an impulse draw outlet. Culling Dais has tap, sacrifice a creature, put a charge counter on Culling Dais, and by paying 1, we can sacrifice Culling Dais and draw a card for each charge counter on it. So this is kind of like built up card draw on an outlet. Speaking of which, we've got Phyrexian Vault, which has pay 2, tap, sacrifice a creature, draw a card. So it's a more expensive sacrifice outlet type effect, but we do get card advantage along with it. Next up, some more artifacts that can help us out though are Witch's Oven, Bubbling Cauldron, and Demon Mail Hallberg. Witch's Oven has tap, sacrifice a creature, create a food token. If the sacrifice creature's toughness though is 4 or greater, you get 2 of those food tokens. And then Bubbling Cauldron also is about life gain. By paying 1, we can tap and sacrifice a creature to gain 4 life. But finally, a different kind of sacrifice outlet comes on Demon Mail Hallberg, an equipment for 4 that has equipped creature gets +4/+2, and by equipping it, we sacrifice a creature. So yeah, this can actually help pump up one of our creatures, which especially helps again since our creatures are going to have trample, or again our spirits are, and haste. So yeah, pump a creature, but on top of that, to actually move this around onto creatures, we can sacrifice creatures for free. So it can be an incredibly effective sacrifice outlet that can also help us out in combat as well. Regardless though, how are we going to get to all these fantastic cards? Well, first up, let's start with some fantastic card advantage creatures in this deck with cards like Magus of the Wheel, Ruin Grinder, and Sandstone Oracle. Magus of the Wheel has pay 1 in a red, tap, and sacrifice it. Each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards. So, like its name implies, this is basically a wheel on a creature. But keep in mind, with Hofri, this is an absolutely incredible card because, again, it's on a creature, and when we sacrifice it, we get a token copy of it thanks to Hofri. So, essentially, with this card, we can wheel twice. Speaking of which, there's Ruin Grinder, which is a 7/4 menace, so yeah, that's a pretty big body that has, when it dies, each player may discard their hand and draw 7 cards. And of course, we've got plenty of ways to actually get this death trigger, again with our sacrifice outlet, so yeah, just wheel, and then we get a token copy of it, which is an 8/5 with trample, menace, and haste. And when we need to wheel again, do it again. Next up, a creature that only benefits us though is Sandstone Oracle, which is a 4/4 flying that has when it enters the battlefield, choose an opponent. If that player has more cards in hand than you, draw cards equal to the difference. So if we just have 1 card in our hand and an opponent has 7, well, we fill all the way back up to 7. And you know what? When we go all the way back down, we can sacrifice to get a token copy of it to do it again. And of course, Combustible Gearhulk can also help us out. A 6/6 construct with First Strike that has when it enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If the player doesn't, you mill 3, then deals damage to that player equal to the total mana value of those cards. So either a player is going to be taking a good amount of damage, or you're going to be drawing some cards. And then Moonblessed Cleric is a 3/2 Human Elf Cleric that has Divine Intervention. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. So yeah, again, there's some fantastic enchantments in this deck, including our Golden Pig. So yeah, get this in play, go get that, and if you ever need a tutor for another enchantment, well, just sacrifice and get a copy of it. Or if you need a tutor for enchantments right away, cast Plea for Guidance, search your library for up to 2 enchantment cards, reveal them, put them in your hand, then shuffle your library. Next up though, let's talk about some more creatures that can help us out with cards like Ardent Elementalist, Dualcaster Mage, and Goblin Dark Dwellers. Ardent Elementalist has when it enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. This is basically Red's version of our Chaomancer, and yeah, it can be fantastic in this deck to get us back one of our Threaten effects, or other cards that we need. And again, keep in mind, because if you sacrifice this and get a copy of it, you're going to be doing it twice. Speaking of which, there's Dualcaster Mage, which has when it enters the battlefield, copy target insert sorcery spell, you may choose 2 targets for the copy. This card is absolutely incredible in this deck, and yeah, of course you can copy, either an opponent's spell or one of your threaten effects, whatever you want to copy, but just by having this in play with a sacrifice outlet, you can also just kind of keep this up as a, hey, whenever I need to copy something, I can. So maybe an opponent tries to counter one of your spells, well, just sacrifice this, get a token copy of it, and say, you know what? No. Regardless, next up there's Goblin Dark Dwellers, which has when it enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant sorcery card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card be put in your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. Basically, cast a threaten effect from your graveyard for free, and then hey, sacrifice this and then do it again. Up next, we even have some enchantments that can help us out with Outpost Siege and Showdown of the Scouts. Outpost Siege says, when it enters the battlefield, choose Khans or Dragons. If you choose Khans at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. And if you choose Dragons, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to any target. So essentially, either repeatable impulse draw or, pinging your opponents whenever your creatures die, which is going to happen a lot since you've got a lot of sacrifice outlets in this deck. And then the first lore counter of Showdown of the Scald says, exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. And on top of that, whenever you cast a spell this turn, put a +1 counter target creature you control with its lore counters of 2 and 3. But yeah, if you're looking for another wheel effect, there's Heartwarming Redemption, which is an instant that says discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many cards +1. You gain life equal to the number of cards in your hand. So some nice additional life gain on top of your own personal wheel. But also we want to talk about some looting effects with Faithless Looting and Thrilling Discovery. Faithless Looting has us draw 2, then discard 2, we can flash it back, and Thrilling Discovery says you gain 2 life, then you may discard 2 cards. If you do, draw 3 cards. Finally though, we've got Reconstruct History, which can get us back a lot of things from our graveyard, so here we go. Return up to 1 target artifact card, up to 1 target enchantment card, up to 1 target instant card, up to 1 target sorcery card, up to 1 target planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand, exile Reconstruct History. So this can get us back a ton of things, and yeah, can really help us out in a lot of situations, help us rebuild our hand. But now that we've talked about card advantage, how do we actually get to this point? So let's talk about some ramp cards with ones that can really help us out in this deck with Knight of the White Orchid, Stoic Farmer, and Burnished Heart. Knight of the White Orchid has when it enters the battlefield, if opponent controls more lands than you may search your library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Chances are going to be pretty likely that at least one of our opponents is going to be playing green, and yeah, is definitely going to have more lands than us. And keep in mind then when we need to, we can actually sacrifice this, get its ETB again by getting that token copy of it, and ramp again. So the same can be said for Stoic Farmer, which basically does the exact same thing, except it's a basic plains. And then Burnished Heart has pay 3, sacrifice it, search your library for the 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tap, then shuffle, and again, when any of these creatures die, we're getting them back to do it again. Or I should say not getting them back, but again, getting a token copy back, you know what I mean. Regardless, of course, we're also going to be running other, more typical ramp spells like Everflowing Chalice, Mindstone, Fire Diamond, Marble Diamond, Boros Signet, Liquid Metal Torque, and the Celestus. And we're also going to be running plenty of fantastic removal spells in this deck with cards like Crush Contraband, Rip Apart, Cathar Commando, Luminate Primordial, Angel of Serenity, Meteor Golem, and Angel of the Ruins. And yeah, keep in mind with any of these creatures that are removal spells, we get to basically do, either their ETB or, sacrifice or whatever twice because, again, we get that copy of them thanks to Hofri. So yeah, these cards can really help us control the board and dominate our opponents. On top of all the other threat effects that we have to actually control their creatures. And yeah, lots of fun. And speaking of fun, let's protect our own creatures with things like Glaring Spotlight, Unbreakable Formation, and Ripborn Defenses. Glaring Spotlight actually helps out in multiple ways. It says creatures opponents control of Hexproof can be the targets of spells and abilities you control as though they didn't have Hexproof, and by paying 3, we can sack it to give our creatures Hexproof and make them unblockable until end of turn. So yeah, first off, even if our opponents have, Hexproof creatures, our threat effects can still get through as long as this is in play. And of course, by paying 3, we can protect our entire team and make them unblockable. So yeah, this can be a fantastic way to finish off our opponents or protect our creatures. And speaking of protecting our creatures and finishing off our opponents, Unbreakable Formation says creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. And if we cast a spell during our main phase, we get a +1 counter on each of those creatures, and they gain vigilance until end of turn. Ripborn Defenses can also protect our creatures, but helps out in a different way. It says populate, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. This card is absolutely incredible. Again, by populating, we can make a copy of any of those spirits that we made. So though our opponents might have had one powerful creature that, we took, sacrifice, and got a copy of, now we get a second copy of it. Or, we can populate one of our creatures that has a fantastic ETB to get that again. So yeah, because populate can be so effective in this deck, let's utilize one of my favorite cards with Song of the World Soul. It says whenever you cast a spell, populate. Yeah, this can get out of control really quickly. Speaking of which, we can also utilize Warstorm Surge, which says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Yeah, we can dish out an incredible amount of damage with this card. Again, just by sacrificing a creature, we get a bigger copy of that creature into play. and then we can ping something. Maybe that's a creature to take it out, or maybe that's our opponent's faces. Regardless, now that we've gone through every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I said at the start of this episode, every single card in this deck, including the commander, is less than $1, so it's a very budget-friendly deck with its estimated cost coming in at $29.22. So yeah, although this deck can be quite brutal, its price is most definitely not. Regardless, keep in mind that this price actually includes the cost of basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those lands, well, there's some extra savings there. Also, keep in mind that there can be some extra savings with this deck by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, because again, those cards need a home too. Though, do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon your location. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.